Okay,
Got
so
it. Okay.
yeah, so before we start, many people told me that it would be cool if you introduce yourself, since many people in Uzbekistan do not know you personally.
Yeah, so my name's Mike Short. I'm an associate professor of nuclear science and engineering at MIT, currently on sabbatical here at A-Star in Singapore, helping to start their fusion materials program. But mainly I studied radiation damage, nuclear engineering, material science, corrosion, and anything related to that.
Okay, so how did you get related to Samarkand and Samarkand State University?
Yeah, so I initially became aware of SSU through something called UNICEN, which is a U.S. State Department funded program to link up U.S. researchers with researchers from other countries. And then they introduced me to Professor Akmal Safarov, who now I consider both a collaborator and a good friend since I've actually come to Uzbekistan, I think 3 or 4 times since. I've hosted Akmal a couple times. We've got a couple of travel grants together, and we're working on something more, but it's pretty clear in the sciences when you connect with someone, it's both personal and professional.
Yeah, how did you like the experience in Uzbekistan?
I absolutely loved it. So it's extremely hospitable country. I'd say everyone I met was super friendly. It was really like authentic place in terms of it seems like everything is set up for the people that live there, which I appreciate. And it's not just, oh, look at this touristic site. It's more like just let's hang out and see how we do things. It helps that I started learning Russian actually right before I came to Uzbekistan the first time. Now, of course, the English of the folks I work with is like perfect. So no need, but it also opens doors, I think, when you take time to learn the language. I don't know when I'll or if I'll learn Uzbek or Tajik, but I'm working on Russian right now.
Uh, yeah, have you ever been in Bukhara?
To Bukhara, yes, I've been once. Actually, first time I visited Akmal, we took a couple days trip to Bukhara just to see the sights.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, so I've got one question regarding the admissions. So, how is
Mhm.
a GPA valuable in the admission process?
How was, sorry, cut out a bit. What was
Okay,
that
so
last one?
how important are SAT and GPA in the admission process?
Gotcha. Yeah. So they are somewhat important, though for a place like MIT, it's not the most important thing. In fact, we take a lot of students that have not perfect SATs, not perfect GPA, because there's a concept called diminishing returns, which means when you start working hard on something, you make a lot of gains and you work really, really hard on this thing and you get only smaller gains. And we're much more interested in people and applicants who change the world and create new ways of achievement, not just achieve perfect score by someone else's metric. So I would say it's important to have good scores and good GPA, like mixture of A's and B's in the US system, but by no means do you have to have all A's. It's just not necessary.
Yeah, because students here are extremely worried about their SAT. When they reach out that 1500 level, they are like, oh, I should retake it and get 1550 just to impress admission
Uh,
officers. Yeah, that's
well,
why.
if it helps, actually, when I applied to MIT as an undergrad, my SAT was below 1500 and I still got in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's not that far below, but it was below 1500 and it's okay.
Mhm. Thanks. Last interview, you mentioned that there should be something called the fire in the belly, right? As I
Mhm.
understood, that's passion, right? You should have an immense passion towards something. Now,
Yep.
how can we showcase it? How do you evaluate it? How can you see it?
Yeah, so fire in the belly means this unquenchable passion that no matter how difficult life gets or how many or how few resources you have, you find a way to achieve what you want, but also you're good at identifying what you want. Like you don't just follow the direction of somebody else. You know what you want and you figure out how to achieve it. That's, I'd say, the most interesting applicants is not someone who says, I got the perfect grades and perfect math scores because I love math, but finding a new way to use the math that you love to help people around you. So in this case, we see this a lot in people's engineering or code portfolios to say, okay, it's fine that you did things in class, but tell us what you created on your own. So showcasing things that you've made, things that you've coded, community events that you've organized, groups that you've begun and become the leader of. This is how we can see that fire in the belly.
Hmm. Understood. Okay. So many people also ask that the importance of Olympiads. right? The
Mhm.
Olympiads tournaments, since a lot of students, if not 100% of students, but at least like 90% of students, believes that Olympiads are the only ways to get into high uh, top-notch universities. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I'd say Olympiads are just one of many, many ways to be recognized as a top performer. But if you obsess over Olympiads, probably you will not get in because only one person can win each Olympiad. And if you spend all your time trying to be that one person, your probability of success is extremely low. It's much, much better time to figure out what you love and do it because then by default, you're number one in this area.
Hmm. Oh, yes, got it. Okay. I also had a question on working with programs such as Horizon and Pioneers. Since summer
Mhm.
is coming and many students are going to be free, we have applied to a lot of programs, and some of us got into Horizon, some of us got into Pioneer Academics. It's basically programs on writing research papers.
Mhm.
What do you think about this? Do you think that that's going to be a valuable experience for us as students to learn about the subject that we're writing? Or do you think that it's going to be just waste of time?
Now, this case, it sounds quite interesting. I'll admit I don't know a lot about the program, but if this is about learning how to write research papers and organize your thoughts in a way to communicate to the public, this is extremely important. I'd say one of the ways that some of our applicants really distinguish themselves is it's even rare for undergraduates to have written their own research papers. But if as a high school or secondary student, if you've performed original research and get it published in a peer-reviewed journal, that stands out tremendously. And again, that's one way in which you choose the field you want, you choose the topic you want. If you can get published and cited, geez, well, that's one way to be number one performer in your area. It's the opposite of the Olympiad approach,
Hmm.
right? Where rather than everyone try to be number one in one field, everyone figure out how to be number one in a new field, and it actually scales that way.
Wow. Yeah, that was basically the question that I asked last time, since I also wrote and published one paper myself, but as I said, the
Mhm.
impact wasn't as high. So as a high school student, again, I mean, I'm limited to the resources, and I don't quite believe that what I'm writing on high level on advanced physics is not going to be helpful for, let's say, researchers in big organizations. But this was a way for
Mhm.
me to show my passion and hope that I did well. But okay. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Because also learning to express yourself in scientific written form will help with everything you do, from the problem sets at schools to future research papers to your applications. Because what I see from a lot of applications is that they may have some really neat stuff happening there, but if you can't express it, it's hard for us to notice it. And therefore you need to drill that writing and expression.
mhm, got it. Thanks. So, also I had a question on the private schools. So many students who got into universities, to the US universities, are primarily from private schools, right? And public
Mhm.
school students think that studying only in private schools can get you in. What do you think about it?
No, so I'd say not a little more than half of our students come from private schools, but that means that almost half come from public schools. So I myself came from a public secondary school, and a lot of my students did as well. So at the end, it's often public schools have fewer resources in general, and so it's a little harder to figure out. You don't have as many mentors telling you what to do, but the proportion that comes from public schools might be surprisingly large. Last time I looked, it was around 40%.
Hmm. Hmm. Got it.
So whether you think, is it worth the money and the time to go to a private school versus can you use that time and money to do something more impactful? I would choose the latter.
Hmm. Well, that's a surprising question, that's a surprising answer because everyone expected that going to private schools, right, will offer a lot of resources, and that's how you can express your passion in many different ways. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
so it's important to note what things are correlated with success versus what things determine success, right? So this way, um, going to private school may be weakly correlated with success at these things. But the underlying variable here is that you have access to more mentoring and resources. But if you create those for yourself too, then you don't need to go to private school to get the same effect.
mhm, got it.
It's just
Okay.
like you see that all the top Olympiad winners tend to go to good schools. And yeah, that's true. It's correlated. But there's also lots of people that go to these schools that never even participate in an Olympiad.
Hmm. Yes, yes. So why people think that private schools are the only ways to get into universities is because of the legitimacy. I don't know like whether that's a rumor or you know about it, but I heard that many US admission officers do not seriously consider the GPA in educational institutions of Uzbekistan to be
Mhm.
legitimate, to be legit. And I do agree that there are certain institutions that do certainly engage in, let's just say, falsification of the scores of the grades that
Mhm.
student receives. But still, I think that there is sort of an rumor, right? Is that the case? Yeah.
Well, no, it's true, and it's happening all over the world. It's not just Uzbekistan. Even schools in the US, we call it grade inflation. When if you look at a school and you realize, oh, well, 90% of students have perfect GPA, clearly they're not being judged correctly and they're not being sorted out. So we do look at the school you come from and say, what is the profile of GPAs coming out of this school? And a lot of the best schools will do that because we want to know, okay, it's not just a number, but what is the scale and how trustworthy is this number? So if you come from a place where grades are inflated to try to get people into good schools, that's working against the students. One, you should tell your administrators making grades artificially high is hurting us. We see this a lot where there are schools we know of in many different countries, which we call them factories for high GPA students. And we just discount the GPA. We do look for certain grades in certain courses, but then we weight things that are more typical of the individual student more heavily. Or sometimes we don't have all the information we want, and it's hard to make a decision. So what I'd say here is that it's not just happening in Uzbekistan. It happens in every country in the world, including the US. And it's a big problem right now.
Yes. I heard that there are other ways to evaluate how well prepared you're academically, like through your
Hmm.
SATs and let's say AP courses that you have taken. That's
Hmm.
why a lot of students in Uzbekistan, as soon as we got opportunity for APs, we certainly took them, right? Just to showcase that apart from GPAs, right, that we got,
Hmm.
they're also able to take hard courses, right?
Yeah. That's one
Uh,
of the best things to do, honestly, with academics is take as many APs as you think you can get good scores in, is not take all the ones you can, but focus on the ones in your subject areas because that is a standardized content heavy exam where these would be quite valuable to say, oh, if there's this guy from a school we've never heard of in Uzbekistan, but he got a 5 on 5 different AP subjects, we know that this person ranks well with the top students in the US as well.
yes. Thanks. Now, I think it would be cool if we move to some different topics. So I want
Mhm.
to ask you, why don't we invest in nuclear fusion more in the USA or in other countries, other developed countries?
Mhm. Yeah, historically, we have not invested in fission much since the 1990s because it was just too expensive. Because especially in a lot of Western economies, building the nuclear plants went way over budget by billions of US dollars and over time by years or even a decade. And it just became clear that economically it wasn't a good prospect. But lately, we've seen big reactors be built in other places, like the 4 reactors in the Arab Emirates were built on time, on budget. And economists often predict what is the low, medium, and high estimates for building a nuclear power plant. These ones came in right at the low end. And so these units, called the Baraka units, show the world that you can build new nuclear on time, on schedule, and make it economical. And so it's the model of how is the plant designed, how is it constructed, who's constructing it matters quite a lot. And so it's very country dependent. What I think this taught everybody was that since the most available international experience comes from the West, like we don't have a lot of facts and figures from Russia and China because they don't share a lot of that information as openly. The picture for nuclear looked really bad. But if you look at what's happening in China right now, they're the biggest builder of new nuclear power plants. They've got 20 something under construction and 60 of them planned, and they're being built pretty cheaply. And so, like, time will tell how well they fare and whether the estimates work out. But the more that openly they share that data, the more that we actually build plants that are on time and on budget, the more it becomes obvious that nuclear can work. And it's really like a project management and a financial model kind of thing. Like
Wow.
technically, it works great. It's the safest energy source there is. It's even safer than things like solar for reasons you may not expect. Is of course solar power plants when they're operating, they don't really cause any damage, but installing solar panels on rooftops and people falling off the roof is the main danger when it comes to solar. And even with that, like it doesn't happen very much, nuclear is still safer. So it's not a question of safety, it's not a question of technology, it's really a question of economics.
Hmm. Okay. Like, I mean, you can certainly agree with me that nuclear fusion is probably one of the most efficient ways to generate energy, right?
Hmm.
And people were pretty, surprised. For example, my friends were surprised that in the US, there are no current construction of the nuclear fusion reactors. Last time you said that it is
Hmm.
not viable yet, right? Since the technology does not exist yet.
Hmm.
But why don't we invest in this so that there are more researches on this, right?
Well, I'd say at least here in the US, we do. So the Department of Energy has a huge program on nuclear energy, built on fission and fusion. And the companies are still pretty big and pretty active, even though there aren't a lot of new builds going on, because managing the existing 100 plants in the US takes a ton of resources, the fuel services, outage services, and such. And all around the world, they have decent nuclear programs. Even in places with no nuclear power, places like Italy, for example, have good nuclear laboratories, even though they don't have any nuclear reactors or power reactors. So I'd say the world is keeping up the investment, and to some degree, the governments know we can't just forget about it. Like even countries like Germany that said we're getting completely out of nuclear power, the new political party that I don't know whether they're running for election or already got it or something said we have to reverse this decision. So
Hmm.
I'd say funding is picking up again. We're really seeing a huge resurgence into nuclear funding all over the world. I mean, like just next door to you guys, Kazakhstan voted to start to build a couple power plants on Lake Balkhash. I was actually there in Almaty during the referendum, and I was impressed. 70% of the people said in favor.
Yo, wow. Okay, that's incredible. Now, what about Uzbekistan? What are the prospects? How viable it is for Uzbekistan, develop pretty good nuclear program.
I think it's quite viable. Well, for one thing, you're already working with Russia on a couple of VVER reactors. I think the plan was to build six of them. I don't know at what stage in the game that is, but there's an agreement either being made or already signed. I don't remember. But there's a lot of nuclear expertise in Uzbekistan, both left over from Soviet times, since a lot of people stayed, like at the Institute of Nuclear Physics, as well as in the physics departments of different universities there. And so a program like this could be spun up fairly quickly with help from a country like Russia or like the US. But workforce training could take 5 or 10 years to produce enough people to actually staff these nuclear plants. When it comes to building it, you'll probably need help from a nearby country, but I think you're working on this with Russia already.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I also heard that there are certain construction agreements with Russia that
Mhm.
there are going to be some nuclear power plants built soon. Like 10, maybe 5 years. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, because they're not, let's just say it is not a widespread knowledge, right? Only
Mhm.
particular people know it. Like particular people are interested, so they go and Google it, but it's not like, widely advertised. That's why I'm asking.
Mhm.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I think it's time for a very, very interesting topic, which is the project that I told you that I am working on.
Mhm.
You actually inspired me to build a linear electron accelerator, and
Mhm.
I'm currently working on it. Okay, so let me first explain what I'm building and like how is it going to build, because
Mhm.
I know that before I start building, I will certainly make certain design mistakes, and I will certainly make mistakes, so I have to warn you. Okay.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, of
I
course,
divided,
that's expected.
yeah. So basically, I want to start with a pretty small project. I want to build the Van de Graaff generator, which I'm currently working with one of my robotics guy friend. So he
Mhm.
is preparing the 3D model, and we have already prepared it, in fact. And today I'll be going and getting the materials, and I'll be starting the construction literally tomorrow or like today if I get all the materials. And
Nice.
Yeah, and we want to make the Van de Graaff generator be pretty big, like with the dome of 30 centimeter in diameter. This way, I think that
Hmm.
we could, get most of it. At first, I was thinking about making it, let's just say, too simple. I was just thinking about the rubber belt that creates friction, and then
Hmm.
copper com. I think it's called brushes, right, or comps, and
Hmm.
yeah. But then I heard an advice that I have to add the capacitor to, yeah, just to make it more efficient, right?
Hmm.
Um, so basically, as far as I'm concerned, the Van de Graaff generator consists of the base, of the tube, of the rubber belt, and of the dome,
Hmm.
right? And there are also certain small details. So as far as I'm concerned, there's a motor that rotates the belt, which goes around the certain tubes that creates friction there, right? And
Hmm.
that friction creates charge, and the charge is transferred to the dome using the brushes, like
Hmm.
copper brushes, right? And
Yep.
and this way there is and this is how we capitalize on the triboelectric effect. So is there any hidden pitfalls that we should be aware of, or just what do you think about it generally?
Sure. Well, the first one is electrical safety because you will be generating some high voltages. And even though the current is not so high, I mean, well, depending on their capacitors, it may be. So the first thing to do will be to have someone local who understands high voltage electricity check it out and check the quality of your insulating materials. Because if you want to store charge on the dome, you're going to have to make sure that's electrically insulated. And once you get into the tens of thousands of volts or more, insulation gets tricky because you can arc across many centimeters of air. It depends on the humidity, it depends on the voltage. And so the first thing is once you have the plans, you want to have your materials checked for electrical safety and then building enclosures to make sure that when it's operating, nobody can stick their hands in, that the enclosure has metal ends and is grounded to the earth to make sure that if any insulation fails or anything goes wrong, there's no way you can get electrocuted. After
Mhm.
that, it's going to be a matter of stabilizing your voltage. And that's part of where the capacitors come in. Is you can
Mhm.
think of capacitors like buckets for charge. They're a little bit leaky depending on which ones they are, but they act as a stabilizing force to make sure that as you generate the voltage, if the belt changes speed a little bit or something else varies, your voltage doesn't fluctuate off and on because your goal is to have a stable beam. And a stable beam requires a stable accelerating voltage and stable anode voltage and focusing ring voltages. So once you
Mhm.
get those two figured out, then you'll be ready to start construction and things should operate closer to what you expect.
Mhm. Okay, understood. So how, okay, so basically I'm starting with the Van de Graaff generator because I read that it would be possible to connect it with the linear electron accelerator. Or do you think
Mhm.
that these are completely two different projects, or is there a way to connect those two?
There are. So what you're doing with the Van de Graaff generator is building a high voltage power supply to power your linear accelerator. Because a well-made accelerator will consume very, very little current. That the idea is that you establish an accelerating potential between the beginning and the end. You'll have some rings or other, like the simplest thing is to have what's called an Einzel-Lens, which is just three metal rings that help shape and focus the beam. And that's the design that I would recommend starting with because it's the simplest. You just cut three rings of the correct size out of, aluminum metal or something similar, and you have resistors between them, and you can set the voltages and therefore focus the electrons which are coming off in a big cone into a nice beam.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so then your Van de Graaff becomes your power supply, and you don't need to buy a fancy high voltage power supply.
Hmm. Understood. So I know that for the linear accelerator, I need the power supply, right? And
Mhm.
is there anything else, I should be aware of and should be prepared for to build a proper linear accelerator? Or is it too early
Yeah.
to talk about it right now?
Oh no, it's not too early, but you'll also need an electron source because just having a high voltage to accelerate things, you need something to accelerate. And the easiest way to make an electron source is with what's called the thermionic effect, which
Mhm.
means a hot filament. You can use like a sharpened tungsten filament or something similar, where you just get it really, really hot by running an electrical current through it. And once it reaches high enough temperature, you exceed what's called the work function, as in the temperature of the atoms is enough that the outer electrons just leave the atom, and then this becomes a very strong thermionic electron emitter.
Mhm.
So you'll have a sharpened piece of tungsten to act as your thermionic emitter, and then you'll have your accelerator to focus and accelerate those electrons at a target. And the way you'll know it's working is if at the end you produce X-rays. Now,
Mhm.
that's another aspect that you need to be very careful of in terms of safety, because if it works, then you'll be producing X-rays out of the end, and that's a radiation safety hazard. So you'll want to shield it as well. But you can use all sorts of materials for X-ray shielding, and there, the denser, the better, and the higher atomic number, the better. So if you have access to bricks of lead, hopefully that you can cover with tape so that you don't get lead on your fingers, you don't want to end up with lead poisoning, then that would work. But even big chunks of steel would work okay. You'll just need to use more of it.
Mhm. As I understood, safety is very important.
Yeah, and knowing what safety, it's easy to know what you if you know what you don't know, addressing that is relatively easy. But it's important to ask other scientists to find out what you don't know that you don't know. So
Mhm.
when you have the designs ready, it would be good to get in contact with folks from INP in Tashkent or in Samarkand to help just look it over and say, hey, I want to build this. What should I be aware of? How do I make sure I do this safely?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, got it. Got it. Okay. Um, sure. I think that I'll be like working on it quite soon, and I think that I'll be done with this machine, and I hope that it will be of a high quality machine, of a high quality device. I'll
Mhm.
certainly do my best.
Just
Okay.
make sure to document it well, right? So you're
Yes.
going to end up with a lot of things that don't work, failures, electrical arcs, and things. Just document and take pictures of everything because in your engineering portfolio, it's not just, oh, I built this from plans and it worked the first time. That's not so interesting. But
Mhm.
if you did detailed theoretical calculations and simulations and it worked the first time, that's cool. Or if you iterated and something broke, so you fixed it many times, that's also cool. And then what that will show is you have the ability to design new things, to debug existing things. That's a skill we're looking for.
Mhm. Got it. Got it. So as the summer is approaching, I was gonna ask like two questions in one question. So,
Mhm.
what are the certain engineering projects we could be working on as engineering enthusiasts and
Mhm.
expand our theoretical knowledge? Maybe there are certain books on technical books that we have to read on maybe electricity or on mechanics. So, what
Mhm.
do you think about it? Could you please advise?
Yeah, so the latter question is more open-ended because that depends on what interests you, right? So if you have a specific field of interest, then of course I can recommend some books, and it's certainly good to read through, but in my opinion, there's no substitute for experience. So for example, if you have interest in programming or robotics or things, there's a whole bunch of contests and groups designing these underwater autonomous vehicles. So this is becoming quite popular at some schools in the US, where if you have a swimming pool, you can program an underwater robot to go through an optical course in the shortest amount of time. And that's one thing is like if in Bukhara or if you don't have such groups, you can start one, right?
Mm.
And get other people interested to say, okay, we're going to have an underwater robot building contest where somebody has to work on the mechanical part, somebody has to work on the waterproofing, someone may have to work on the software. And first step, of course, is make it remote controlled. Second step is make it autonomous, which means something where you can sense the environment around you and navigate a maze. So if there are clubs like this, participating is one thing. If there aren't clubs like this, starting one would be a whole new thing,
Hmm.
which would really get you recognized.
Okay. What
Yeah.
about the nuclear?
Challenges like that, right?
Got it. Understood. What about the
There's
nuclear?
also a fun one called, have you heard of battle bots before?
Uh, no, not really. Can you
So
elaborate?
people design robots that try and attack each other and destroy each other.
Oh,
And
yes, yes.
yeah, these sorts of contests are tons of fun and it leaves you really, really open to design with anything. And oftentimes to make sure no one has too much of an advantage from resources, you can set the maximum amount of money you can use on the robot, maybe the maximum weight, the maximum size of the battery, and then people have to be creative how do they make the most attacking robot with the limited resources? So
Hmm.
it's an optimization problem.
Hmm. Okay, sure. Yeah, so you mentioned that there are certain things that we can do for programming, but what are the
Mhm.
things that we could do as an engineering student? Let's just say nuclear engineering.
So for nuclear, that's a little harder. Things like what you're doing with the accelerator is a perfect example. Other ones is if you're interested in environmental surveying, I can tell you there's lots of places in Uzbekistan where there's variable radiation levels, whether you're closer to the bedrock or there's historical mining activity from Soviet Union. Building and using these radiation detectors is something you can do with very little resources. There's a lot of open source ones. Like at MIT, we open sourced a Geiger counter kit, and then going to explore the world around you to do some radiation surveying by yourself, as long as you don't get the authorities worried about you, right? Because, of course, you don't want to make people suspicious. So if you tell them what you're doing ahead of time, it's probably a good idea. Um, but that way you can get into environmental remediation and making sure that people are safe from historical Soviet mining activities.
Hmm. Yeah, got it, got it. Now, something unrelated. What a structural engineer could do, a civil structural engineer.
Hmm. So there, I think that's not my field as much, but off the top of my head, whether it's, I mean, there's lots of contests and things for building bridges and structures with limited resources, or you could try apprenticing at a real structural engineering firm to see how it's done, right? Because there's constant need for inspection and renewal of infrastructure.
Mhm.
And if you want to see really how it's done, you can ask to say, hey, can I be an intern at a firm that's there to inspect and repair bridges or roads or highway infrastructure, or contact the Afrasiab company and say, like, how do you keep the bullet train running? Because that's some pretty precise structural engineering.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. That's a very great idea. So I asked it because of my friend, since he was
Mhm.
extremely interested in it, but he's not necessarily, but he doesn't quite know like what to do. That's why I asked. Okay.
Mhm.
So at the end, I want to ask you whether there are ways I could connect with the other, let's just say international students who are also interested in nuclear engineering, since I
Mhm.
know that I believe that the best way to grow is to be in the environment, in the right environment where people are interested in advanced topics and people who are smarter than you to become smarter yourself. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's two groups I'd recommend reaching out to, or actually three groups, right? One is the American Nuclear Society. And despite the fact that it's American Nuclear Society, they have chapters all over the world.
Hmm?
So if there isn't one already in Uzbekistan or Central Asian countries, you could consider starting one to try and accumulate all of the activities happening there. And they hold events not just, mostly in US, but not entirely. The second one is the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, which has a lot of technical cooperation projects in nearly every country in the world. And they hold lots of events all over the world that may be easier for you to get to. And the third one is called IYNP, or the International Youth Nuclear, I think, program, but I'm not sure what about the last P. But their goal is to take all the young people from all over the world that are interested in all things nuclear, and they hold conferences rotating all around the world, but also have connections and databases of people that you can reach out to.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks. Great. Um,
Sure.
okay. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I really enjoyed talking to you. And
Likewise. Yeah.
yeah. So, well, you mentioned that you're gonna come to Para, right, and travel around
Mhm.
Uzbekistan. It would be very nice to meet with you because it would be so much stuff to, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. Thanks. Again, I want to ask whether it's viable to, uh, publish it in my
Mhm.
channels.
Yeah,
Did
please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a very nice talk. Um, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, glad to help.